I am here. Hello, everyone. Let me quickly share my screen. I hope everyone can see the title slide now. The exciting title slide, of which you have seen probably quite a few in the last couple of months, like everyone else. So, everyone, welcome to this webinar talking about tackling telecoms subscription fraud in the digital world. My name is Joerg Router. I'm part of Fico's fraud and financial crime line of business. So I'm based actually in Germany, work for the EMEA region mostly, and but in my past I've also worked in Asia Pacific for a couple of years, lived in Singapore, worked on different projects in my past life, so to say, across the world really. So I have a bit of a global exposure, if you will, to fraud matters. We typically work in Fico, we work with a lot of different industries. So we work with telco, banking, insurance, and so on. And the interesting bit is, and we'll come to that a little bit later as well, is that a lot of fraud MOs, modi operandi, actually sort of show up in different industries as well, which makes it quite beneficial, so to say, to also look across to other industries a little bit. Now, as Sarah has said before, all of us have had a lot of webinars in a couple of months, and I really appreciate that you take the time to listen in to this one today. And I will try to make it informative and a little bit entertaining at the same time. That is my my goal, at least for today. So we'll start by talking about why should you care? Why is telecoms subscription fraud actually a topic to invest your time and your interest in? Most of you actually work in fraud in telecoms, so you will be very aware. But maybe if you want to show this recording to someone else to get a bit of an insight, this should be helpful. The core part of this presentation of this webinar actually will be what I call a little bit cheeky, maybe your subscription fraud cheat sheet. So a condensed version of hints of tips and tricks how to tackle subscription fraud. No silver bullets, as always, but a few very helpful hints, I believe. And last but not least, bringing it to life. So looking at a few examples, looking at a few real world pieces of software at organizational aspects and so on that we have worked with our clients in the last couple of years. Now, why should you care? Very simply, depending on whom you ask, subscription fraud is a multi-billion-dollar problem globally each year. So this number, $12 billion subscription fraud per year, this is actually taken from a Europol report. Europol has a pretty good reputation in many sort of fraud types. They do very in-depth investigations and assessments. If you ask other people, it could be even more, could be 15, 16 million, could be 8, 9 billion. So this is a massive number actually. And to sort of put it in perspective, how massive this number is, $12 billion is coincidentally approximately the GDP of the Bahamas, which is, I think, quite astounding. Why is subscription fraud more of an issue today than it used to be a couple of years back? Very simply because the devices, the hardware has become more and more expensive over time. Actually, I think the newest iPhone 12 Pro is more or less the same price like the 11 Pro, which wasn't the case the last couple of generations. So it sort of progressively got more expensive. And these devices are a very attractive target for a fraudster. Because if you buy this in the Apple Store today, it costs you £1,500 if you take the top model. It's a lot of money. But if you go for a contract, if you go for a subscription with a telco, then it will cost you a sort of token fee up front, maybe £29 or dollars or euros or whatever your currency is, and then a monthly payment. And if you sort of skip those monthly payments, then that is a very cheap iPhone. And it's not just iPhones, it's not just Apple driving prices up. In the Android world, the prices actually for the top models are very similar, like they are in the Apple ecosystem. So you can see similar prices here. And of course, it's very attractive. It's a very attractive target for a fraudster because you have a tiny asset, a tiny piece of hardware that you basically get handed over the counter if you subscribe for a contract, and then you can sell it off immediately. You can sell it off on eBay, on Craigslist, on any neighborhood market, so to say, for close to the original price. And the problem is even bigger than that. A lot of fraud actually, and this is a common issue that we see across industries and across different fraud types as well. A lot of fraud never gets discovered and sort of ends up in your collections books. And the estimate is that around 20% of credit risk losses are actually subscription fraud losses, misclassified subscription fraud losses. Similar in retail banking, where you have application fraud, which is also around 20% of credit risk. And this has implications, apart from the sort of missed fraud losses, which you don't classify as such. It also means that you waste operating costs because you will not collect from a first-party fraudster, for example. It means that the write-off volumes are higher than they would need to be. And it also means that you base your lending scorecards on the wrong data. You base your lending scorecards on data which actually contains a part of fraud as well. And last but not least, of course, this means that your fraud risk disclosure is bigger. Now, I said before, at Fico, we work with a lot of different industries and very similar issues that like those that we see in telecom, in subscription fraud, we also see in other industries. In retail banking, it's called application fraud. So someone applying for credit cards, loans, anything like that, without intention to repay. In insurance, we often see sort of manipulation of collateral from an applicant to get lower premiums, apart from all the collusion and all the other insurance fraud MOs that can happen, of course. And maybe closest to telco subscription fraud in auto, actually. You have a similar situation. You have a very valuable asset in that car, a little bigger, a car, that you get, and if a fraudster can sort of trick themselves into getting a car loan, auto loan, then this is very easy for them to sort of sell this off on the black market, for example. Now, what is also common is that we see different identities sort of playing a role in subscription fraud or application fraud or whatever it's called. So we have first-party fraud, which basically means I use my own identity to apply for a loan without the intention to pay, or for a subscription without the intention to pay my monthly fees. We have third-party fraud, which is basically identity theft. So I impersonate someone else to, in his or her name, get a contract. And we also see synthetic fraud, which is basically a fabricated identity, meaning I take bits and pieces from existing persons, like a social security number, for example, or an existing address, or names and name and date of birth combinations and so on, and mix and match them and basically create Frankenstein's monster from a lot of pieces of information. There's actually a bit of a debate going on at the moment in the fraud world, whether synthetic belongs to first party or to third party, whether it's its own category, so to say. I don't know. In the end, it doesn't really matter. You have to sort of tackle all these different fraud types. That's the gist of it. And What's also common is that most fraud teams we work with across industries as well struggle with the same issues. They have the same challenges that they face. First thing is the fraud department typically is not top of mind, so to say. If, for example, or when, for example, marketing comes up with a new campaign to push push originations for the new iPhone launch or anything like that, fraud sort of has to be covered somehow. But for the commercial decision making, there's this is not the primary concern, so to say. Cross-functional collaboration. Mostly the fraud teams actually do work with the credit risk team quite okay. So there's a lot of exchange here and a bit of collaboration on the technical side as well. But there's a lot of potential here which sort of is not utilized. And there's also a lot of potential in collaboration with other functional areas, with collections and recovery, for example, with the marketing team to a certain extent. So this typically gets a bit left behind. And what's also interesting or problematic actually is there's no granular, no consistent view of fraud. So just saying something or an application is fraudulent or not doesn't tell the whole story. So you have to sort of distinguish between first and third party fraud, synthetic identity theft, synthetic fraud. You have to understand what kind of fraud MO are you looking at, because only this information, if you track it, if you monitor it, and if you use it to feed back into your decisioning, into your fraud decisioning, can give you the full view, so to say. And this also applies to lifecycle fraud view. So what I mean here is sort of the technical side of this collaboration, which is more on the organizational side. So just doing a one-off pre-book subscription fraud check is not sufficient to get the full view on fraud. You have to actually monitor post-book behavior as well. You have to look at payment histories and so on. And this also has to feed into your operations. And that is no easy feat, because typically the tools that are being used by fraud departments are pretty restrictive, and also the data on which you operate is pretty restricted. It's basically narrow only for the use case that is sort of obvious. And that's sometimes even outdated. So often we see fraud departments sort of using 10-year-old decisioning engines that have been around forever, that are not maintained anymore, just because they sort of work. So it's sufficient. Now, these are the challenges. How can you address them? I could spend days talking about this topic, as you can imagine, but this is a webinar. This should be short and fun. So what I'm trying to do here is to create a quick cheat sheet to tackle subscription fraud. And a cheat sheet will never give you the full story, but it will give you the hints that you need to sort of think back to the stuff that you need to cover. And we'll be looking at three areas, or three pillars, if you like, on this cheat sheet. And let's go through them one by one. The first one is what I would call the organizational coverage. So, and we always tend to look at technology first. We tend to look at tools, like what kind of link analysis or what kind of analytic model and so on. But actually the foundation for everything is organizational coverage. You want to make sure that you have a tone from the top. So top level management needs to be on board when it comes to fraud prevention. They need to sort of direct the organization into the right direction. And to achieve that, it helps a lot if you have dedicated ownership. If you have, Negatively speaking, if you have one neck to choke. Positively speaking, if you have one person or one very small team which has access to all management levels, to all departments, which sits at the table for each and every decision that is made, which covers fraud aspects in the life cycle. And this then leads to the last one, tie into credit risk and collections. So you want to make sure that you're aligned with these different functional areas. Credit risk and collections are just the most obvious ones, so to say. If you look at the customer life cycle, everything sort of starts with credit risk, and it sometimes does end with collections. So it's important to make this connection to those teams. The next one, the green pillar. This is what I would call data-driven strategies. In some cases, we base our fraud prevention strategies on our experience, on our gut feel, and on our best efforts, so to say, on hearsay, on what we see sort of from the operational side. That works okay. That's not the worst strategy, but you can much improve your fraud detection, fraud management performance if you have robust data that you can use to define, to track, and to tweak your strategies. And what does this mean? What is required for that? First of all, and this might be surprising at first sight, you need clearly defined terms and metrics. What we often see is that there's no common understanding in an organization about what, for example, no intention to pay actually means. Does that mean no payment at all? Does that mean there's up to one payment or two payments? What is synthetic fraud? Is it first? Is it third? Is it something else altogether? Sort of aligning on these terms and defining the metrics, defining the KPIs that you want to track and monitor, and that you sort of report upwards as well, is crucially important. And this leads actually to the next point on this list, on this cheat sheet. You want to have an honest and consistent reporting. In some cases, reporting seems to have a bit the goal to conceal any weaknesses instead of revealing weaknesses. That is sort of to cover my reputation and to make sure that I don't get blamed for whatever goes wrong. But that doesn't help. That doesn't help the organization. That doesn't help the cause, so to say. It doesn't help the goal of trying to prevent subscription fraud. So it's very important that with defined metrics, you create a reporting infrastructure, so to say, where you regularly, not just with someone shouting over the table, can you do the report for me for the next for the last 3 months or something, but that you have a regular reporting with defined metrics, and you can then use these reporting, these figures, these KPIs, you can use them to feed back into your fraud strategies. And this brings you to this data-driven strategy. You know what you're looking for. You know where you are at the moment. You see trends. You see if for example, in certain regions, subscription fraud suddenly goes up. You see if whether certain fraud MOs suddenly occur more often than they used to. You see whether, for example, maybe the iPhone is not the most targeted device. Maybe it's this mid-price range Android device instead. And all of this can then feed into your decisioning, into your strategies. And last but not least, the tools, of course, also play an important role. So all of this is great, but to execute it, to make it work 24/7 and make it work in near real time during the pre-book phase, you need comprehensive and sophisticated tool support. And this again, this is Pandora's box, right? We could talk about a million topics here, but a few important cornerstones for this comprehensive tool support, from my point of view or our point of view, are first of all digital identity proofing and capture very early on in the life cycle of a customer relationship. And from then on, you want to cover the full customer life cycle. You actually want to monitor performance of your contracts, of your subscriptions over time. You want to bring together the different aspects: subscription fraud, usage fraud, all sort of other types of misuse, of abuse that can play a role over the lifetime of a contract or of a customer relationship. And and of course, at some point, you end up with the insight that decisioning rules and sort of manually maintained strategies are okay, but don't perform as good as they actually could be. And this is when you come to machine learning analytics, so to use artificial intelligence with your past data to drive your, or to feed into your decisioning, and also with link analysis. And link analysis, we've been doing a lot of work around this in the last couple of years. This is really providing tremendous uplift into your fraud prevention strategies. And there we have it. This is, as I said, the most important slide in this webinar. If you take a screenshot now, you can switch off. No, please don't. I will talk a bit about how to bring this to life. But these few keywords, these few bullet points, so to say, really provides, I think, a very good starting point to tackle subscription fraud in your organization. So, a couple examples, bringing it to life. What needs to be done? What can be done? Organizational coverage. We already talked a bit about this. I can't show you any existing org charts from existing client engagements or anything like that. But to sort of summarize again, what's very important is you want to have this tone from the top. You want to clearly define roles, responsibilities, who's accountable for fraud when in the life cycle, and how do these different roles and these different people sort of interact. Team structures play a role. So how do you set up fraud coverage in your organization? Do you have one guy here and one girl there and another guy somewhere else? And do they only meet at the during a lunch break, or do they stay in contact all the time? Do they exchange information? Do they exchange their experiences? And this also means organizational coverage also means capacity planning. So you want to make sure that when new iPhone launches, when Black Friday, like in, I think, 2 weeks from now, comes along, that you have the capacity to handle the load. Because fraudsters, of course, also know about these peaks, and they know that that at that point, it's easier for them to sort of fly below the radar, because there's so much work to be done for the fraud team. And coming back to the topic of ownership, so single ownership across the credit life cycle, what does this mean? When we talk about subscription fraud, the tendency is to think that we look at the application at the pre-book stage, when your credit risk is done, when you sort of collect the information from the client, and at some point you take a decision, and the decision is go or no go. And if the decision is go, then the fraud team doesn't need to care about it anymore. That is not true, however. You need to monitor during early life, for sure, for subscription fraud, but you also need to monitor through the extended life, through troubled life, delinquency. If any of your contracts goes into delinquency, what does this mean for the fraud team? What does it mean for the likelihood that you actually have been dealing with the frauds all along? During extended life, what is especially interesting is upgrades. So if you have a client that comes in with a prepaid contract and maybe with a very cheap phone, and then upgrades over time, maybe upgrades to a post-pay, lower tier contract with a slightly better but not super expensive device, and a little bit later upgrades again to the next expensive one. Is that maybe a sleeper? Is that a sleeper that is sort of ranking up their reputation to bust out at some point? And what I mentioned earlier, trusted identity or identity proofing. This is gaining more and more traction in the last few years, and we are actively working with a lot of our clients on this aspect. Building a trusted identity, either for a new customer or also for an existing customer, by, for example, enrolling someone with their ID card over an app or in a store or anything like that. This enables you to have a much better authentication across the life cycle. So you can do multi-factor authentication, biometrics. If you do an enrollment for new customers during pre-book, you can actually already do face biometrics. You can do voice biometrics, which covers the call center channel as well. You can do behavioral authentication, which is super interesting. Behavioral authentication, without going into too much detail, allows you to have what we call frictionless authentication. If you in the backend, so to say, cover network information, device information, user information, biometric typing patterns, and so on, then you can actually authenticate customers very often without asking them for a password or a passphrase or anything like that, because you have this trust in the back that the behavioral metrics, so to say, or the behavioral metrics tell you that you're actually talking to the right person. Quick look at one of Fico's solutions. Identity proofing is our identity enrollment solution. So how does this work? This is mostly, but not only, mostly for sort of self-service to the customer. If I want to get a new contract, maybe I open up the website of the provider or the mobile phone app that I have anyways. If I want to upgrade, for example, I complete my application, and then this workflow, this identity proofing workflow starts. So I scan my driver's license, or I scan my passport or anything like that. In the back end, from this one, the data is extracted using text recognition. An ID authentication can be performed by a third-party provider, whether this is a stolen identity, for example. Next thing we do is proof of possession. So I take a selfie with my mobile phone, and in the back end, we do a face verification. We do a verification whether the selfie, the face in front of the app is actually the same person like on the photo ID that we have scanned earlier. And we do also liveness detection, because the immediate reaction is, of course, okay, then I just use picture of some guy, right? Like this one or anything like that, and suddenly I'm that guy. But in identity proofing, we do liveness detection, so we see whether people are looking left and right and blinking and so on. And then last but not least, ID corroboration. So this is where it all comes together, so to say. And at this point, which is a very smooth and painless process for the customer, you have a proven identity of your new customer and can take this into the authentication stage later on. Now, that's great if you have it. In many cases, however, you need to sort of bring together a lot of data from different sources, and many of those sources do not have a trusted identity, do not have a verified identity, but have actually a lot of problematic or erroneous data. And this is one example. These are examples of variations of my actual name that I have seen in the last couple of years in hotel check-ins, trade shows, and so on. As a human, we see, okay, this is very likely the same guy. So this Joerg Router, this is probably just a small mistake, but this is actually the same person. For a computer, it's not so easy. And what we do in our solutions is very sophisticated matching based on the type of information. Because matching a name like this one is a whole different affair, like if you would match, for example, an email address, or if you would match a postal address. In a postal address, you have different data fields. And in names, you have regional differences. So we can sort of adapt to these differences. Also, I mentioned earlier link analysis real briefly. This it's got a lot of traction recently, and it has a lot of benefits in investigations, first of all. So the first thing people think about when they hear link analysis is exactly that. You have a link chart, which sort of brings together your new applicant, your active contracts, declined applications, fraudulent ones, and so on. Not just the first level connection, but also in a second level connection. So an indirect connection in this example from the new application to the fraudulent one. And you can use, of course, this interface, and this is a screenshot from Identity Resolution Engine, one of our solutions. You can use this to investigate potential fraudulent activity. You can use this to find fraud rings. And it's a really how to say, interactive interface. You can zoom into these graphs. You can group some of these nodes. You can sort of filter through stuff. You see a timeline at the bottom of the screen where you can jog through time and see how this network built up over time. But the thing is, this is just the starting point for link analysis from our point of view. This visual inspection is nice and it's great and it looks cool the first couple of times you do it, but you don't want your fraud team, your analysts, to waste too much time in this one. What you want to do instead is you want to have automated back-end processes and decisions which take these link charts, these graphs, and sort of extract insights, extract interesting information from this one and feed into your automated decisioning. And this is exactly what SNA does, social network analysis. Social network here is not Facebook, LinkedIn or something like that, but really this sort of relationship graph of people, of companies, of staff members, of devices, and so on. And what SNA does is it takes these link charts, extracts meta information from that one, like how many nodes of a certain kind do we have? What is the average price of the devices which are behind contracts in this network? Velocity, like how fast did this network grow? Did this grow over the last 2 years, or did it grow just within a few weeks, very recently? And all of this is information that can feed into your decision rules, and it can feed into your analytic machine learning models. These are very valuable insights which allow, especially in machine learning, the machine learning model, to make much better predictions whether an incoming application with its network of associated data points will become fraudulent, will be a never payer, will be a third party account takeover, for example. And just real quick, for machine learning models, sometimes the the objection is that these are black box models. So if the never payer score is high, like 830 in this example, why is it high? So I can't make use of that. This is where explainable AI comes in this particular case, what we call network alerts. So the network alerts basically give you context. Why is the machine learning score for this particular network, for this particular application, abnormally high? In this example, you see there's problematic network nodes, which I think we can agree upon. There's high application velocity. This is something that you don't see in this link chart, but which would be sort of extracted from this information. And you have a suspicious device price level. So 800 pounds is actually pretty high for a network of 5 applications. And the thing is, I've shown you all these different pieces of technology, of solutions now. Bringing them all together is often a bit of a challenge. Now, how do we address that? And we always start sort of from the user's perspective. So if you look at the digital transformation, if you look at bringing some of your paper-based, or not some of, all of your paper-based processes and workflows and so on, and your sneaker net workflows as well into the digital world. First of all, you're looking at the business owners. You're looking at your head of fraud, for example. IT does play a major role as well. As most of you will probably also have experienced, IT resources are always in high demand. Very often the IT department is a bit of a bottleneck in an organization because there's just so many projects they are working on. And also in terms of infrastructure, it's not so easy to just bring in another tool and get it connected to whatever else. This puts a lot of strain on the IT organization. And last but not least, data scientists. This is relatively new. So a couple years ago, data scientists were a bit more exotic to find in the telco part, maybe from the credit risk departments. But a lot of the organizations we work with now have dedicated data scientist teams, or have data scientists within other teams as a to cover their specific use cases. And these play a very important role in this digital transformation as well. And what we do at Fico actually is we bring these stakeholders together in what we call the Fico platform. Fico platform, sort of thinking from the users first of all. And if we look at not really the architecture, but at the high level approach, so to say, we start with the different users at the top, and then we have different interfaces, not necessarily user interfaces, but interfaces for the different users. A data scientist will use very different tools and management interfaces than a business user might. IT will also use different interfaces for their monitoring requirements and so on. But the Fico platform sort of allows each and every one of these users or these stakeholders to use an interface for their use cases. And behind these interfaces, there's the execution layer. There's your decision engines, your rule engines. There's your analytic models. There's your contextual data, which gets persisted, is made available to all the different executional components. And all of that, of course, is built on a foundation of data. There's this, everyone says that, but it's sort of true. Data is the new oil. If you have the proper data, you can make much better decisions, of course. But you have to get data into your platform, and there's many different ways to do it. Many different requirements as well, depending on the kind of system you're talking with, depending on the kind of runtime requirements, whether you're chucking gigabytes of batch data into the platform, whether you're streaming real-time data, which needs to have a response back within milliseconds. All of this is covered in this Fico platform. And there's a lot of benefits to this platform approach. I won't go into all these benefits, no worries, but just a few here you might actually recognize in slightly different wording, like breaking down barriers between different teams, between different organizational units, collaboration, analytics and artificial intelligence using on the platform. And actually what it says here, operationalize analytics and AI, is a very important aspect. Your data scientists will probably be very good in building a model, an artificial intelligence model, on a data set that has been extracted somewhere, and it will likely perform well. You will have good ROC curves and everything that show, yeah, this is a well-performing artificial intelligence model. It's great, but it's only the first step. Only a fraction of AI models built actually ever make it into production, are ever operationalized. Why is that? It's not trivial to actually take a model from the lab, so to say, and put it into an existing IT ecosystem, into an existing framework where you have data coming in relentlessly, where you have to work with very different constraints than you have in a lab. And there's much more to Fico platform. If you're interested in that, reach out to me. We can talk in a lot more detail about that. And with that, I'm actually finished with the slides. So Sarah, do we have? I think we have time for a bit of Q&A, right?